So I will introduce each author, and then they'll read for approximately 25 minutes. We won't be taking questions from the audience, but after the readings, there will be time for you to speak with the authors. We are proceeding in reverse alphabetical order. So Shyam Selvadurai will read first, followed by Thomas King, and followed by Dion Brand. So let me begin with Shyam. Shyam Selvadurai was born in Colombia, Sri Lanka in 1965. He came to Canada with his family at the age of 19. He has studied creative writing and theater and has a BFA from York University. You can hear me all right, right?
Uh-huh.
Has a BFA from York University and an MFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia. His first novel, Funny Boy, was published to acclaim in 1994 and won the W.H. Smith Books in Canada First Novel Award. And in the US, it won the Lambda Literary Award. Lambda was also named, Funny Boy was also named a notable book by the American Library Association and was translated into 8 languages. His second novel, Cinnamon Gardens, was published in Canada, the UK, and the US and has been translated into 9 languages. It was shortlisted for Canada's Trillium Award, as well as the Aloha Literary Award in Denmark and the Premio Internazionale Riccardo Bacchelli in Italy. Shyam is the editor of an anthology, Storywala, a celebration of South Asian fiction, published in Canada and the US. His novel for young adults, Swimming in the Monsoon Sea, was shortlisted for the Governor General's Award and is also the winner of the Lambda Literary Award in the US, the Canadian Library Association Book of the Year Award, and silver winner in the young adult category of Forward Magazine's Book of the Year Award. His articles have appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, Time Magazine, Toronto Life, Walrus Magazine, En Route Magazine, the Globe and Mail, and the Toronto Star. He served as festival curator for the Gala Literary Festival for 2 years. His fourth novel, Hungry Ghosts, was published April 2nd, 2013 in Canada, India, and Sri Lanka, and it was shortlisted for Canada's prestigious Governor General's Award for Fiction and longlisted for the DSC South Asia Literature Prize. His latest work is a comprehensive anthology of Sri Lankan literature, Many Roads Through Paradise. Please join me in welcoming Shyam Selvadurai.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for going in reverse alphabetical order. I always get stuck at the end because my last name starts with S, and it's agonizing to sit here and wait for your turn. So Dion, it's your turn for a change to sit and wait. I'm not going to read from my latest novel because it hasn't been published in the US yet, so I was rushing out the door and I've had a rather busy day, so I thought I'd pick the book that was easiest to read, and it's my first novel, Funny Boy. And Funny Boy is set in the, which is published in the States and actually has been reissued with some new cover. I don't know why, but there's something going on. They've actually taken the trouble to come up with a new cover. Funny Boy is set in the world of upper middle class Sri Lankan Tamils in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and it takes place in the late 1970s and early 80s, and is narrated through the eyes of a young boy named Arji, who's about 6 or 7 years old. Now, Arji is a bit of an oddity in his world because unlike regular boys who like to do regular boys things like, I don't know, play cricket or cowboys and Indians, what Arji likes to do is he likes to put on a sari and pretend he's a bride. And this, in fact, is his obsession, weddings and all the accoutrements surrounding it. So whenever the cousins gather together at their grandparents' house for what they call a spend the day, Arji organizes the girl cousins into a game called Bride, in which he is, of course, the bride. And this is bliss for him. He has an old white sari that he puts on, attaches a lace curtain to his head, and pretends he's a bride. Now into this world of the girls comes a cousin from abroad, whom the other cousins promptly and cruelly nickname her fatness. And her fatness, because she's the new kid, must play the most boring role in Bride, the role nobody else wants to play, which is, of course, the groom. Now, her fatness is not pleased with the situation, and I'm going to read you the part where the bride and groom finally clash. And the word amma means mummy in Tamil. When lunch was over, my grandparents retired to their room for a nap. The other adults settled in the drawing room to read the newspaper or doze off in the huge armchairs. We, the bride-to-be and the bridesmaids, retired to the servants' room for the long-awaited ritual of dressing the bride. We were so disturbed, however, by the sound of booming laughter. At first we ignored it, but when it persisted, getting louder and more drawn out, my sister Sonali went to the door and looked out. Her slight gasp brought us all out onto the porch. There the groom strutted up and down, head thrown back, stomach stuck out. She sported a huge bristly moustache, torn out of the broom, and a cigarette of rolled paper and talcum powder, which she held between her fingers and puffed on vigorously. The younger cousins, instead of getting dressed and putting the final touches to the altar, sat along the edge of the porch and watched with great amusement. "Aha, me hearties," the groom cried on seeing us. She opened her hands expansively. "Bring me my fair maiden, for I must be off to my castle before the sun setteth." We looked at the groom, aghast at the change in her behavior. She sauntered towards us, then stopped in front of me, winked expansively, and with her hand under my chin, tilted my head back. "Ah," she exclaimed, a bonny lass indeed." "Stop it," I cried and slapped her hand. "The groom is not supposed to make a noise." "Why not?" her fatness replied angrily, dropping her hearty voice and accent. "Why can't the groom make a noise?" "Because." "Because of what?" "Because the game is called bride, bride, not groom, groom." Fatness seized her moustache and flung it to the ground dramatically. "Well, I don't want to be the groom anymore. I want to be the bride." He stared at her in disbelief, amazed by her impudent challenge to my position. "You can't," I finally said. "Why not?" her fatness demanded. "Why should you always be the bride? Why can't someone else have a chance too?" "Because," Sonali, my sister said, joining in, "because RG is the bestest bride of all." "But he's not even a girl," her fatness said, closing in on the lameness of Sonali's argument. "A bride is a girl, not a boy." She looked around at the other cousins and then at me. "A boy cannot be the bride," she said with deep conviction. "A girl must be the bride." I stared at her, defenseless in the face of her logic. Fortunately, Sonali, loyal to me as always, came to my rescue. She stepped in between us and said to her fatness, "If you can't play properly, go away. We don't need you." "Yes, Lakshmi," another of my supporters cried. The other cousins, made bold by Sonali's fearlessness, murmured in agreement. Her fatness looked at us all for a moment, and then her gaze rested on me. "You're a pansy," she said, her lips curling in disgust. We looked at her blankly. "A faggot," she said, her voice rising against her uncomprehending stares. "A sissy," she shouted in desperation. It was clear by this time that these were insults. "Give me that jacket," Sonali said. She stepped up to her fatness and began to pull at it. "We don't like you anymore." "Yes," Lakshmi cried. "Go away, you fatty boom boom." This was an insult we all understood, and we burst out laughing. Someone even began to chant, "Hey fatty boom boom, hey fatty boom boom." Her fatness pulled off her coat and trousers. "I hate you all," she cried. "I wish you were all dead." She flung the groom's clothes on the ground, stalked out of the back garden, and went around the side of the house. We returned to our bridal preparations, chuckling to ourselves over the new nickname we had found for our cousin. When the bride was finally dressed, Lakshmi, the maid of honor, went out of the servants' room to make sure that everything was in place. Then she gave the signal, and the priests and choir boys began to sing with a certain want of harmony and correct lyrics, the voice that breathed, "O Eden." Solemnly, I made my way down the steps towards the altar that had been set up at one end of the back garden. When I reached the altar, however, I heard the kitchen door open. I turned to see her fatness with her mother, Kanti Auntie. The discordant singing died out. Kanti Auntie's eyes were narrowed with anger. "Who's calling my daughter fatty?" Kanti Auntie said. She came to the edge of the porch. We stared at her, no one daring to own up. Her gaze fell on me and her eyes widened for a moment. Then a smile spread across her face. "What's this?" she said. She came down a few steps and crooked her finger at me. I looked down at my feet and refused to go to her. Come here, come here." Unable to disobey her command any longer, I went. She looked me up and down for a moment and then gingerly, as if she were examining raw meat at the market, turned me around. "What's this you're playing?" she asked. "It's Bride, Bride," Auntie Sonali said. "Bride, Bride," she murmured. Her hand closed on my arm in a tight grip. "Come with me." I resisted, but her grip tightened, her nails digging into my elbow. She pulled me up the porch steps and towards the kitchen door. "No," I cried. "No, I don't want to." Something about the look in her eyes terrified me so much I did the unthinkable and I hit out at her. This made her hold my arm even more firmly. She dragged me through the kitchen, into the corridor, and towards the drawing room. I felt a heaviness begin to build in my stomach. Instinctively, I knew that Kanti Auntie had something terrible in mind. As we entered the drawing room, Kanti Auntie cried out, her voice brimming over with laughter. "See what I found!" The other aunts and uncles looked up from their papers or bestirred themselves from their sleep. They gazed at me in amazement, as if I had suddenly made myself visible like a spirit. I glanced at them and then at Amma's face. Seeing her expression, I felt my dread deepen. I lowered my eyes. The sari suddenly felt suffocating around my body, and the hairpins which held my veil in place pricked at my scalp. Then the silence was broken by the booming laugh of Cyril Uncle, Kanti Auntie's husband. As if she had been hit, Amma swung around in his direction. The other aunts and uncles began to laugh too, and I watched as Amma looked from one to the other like a trapped animal. Her gaze finally came to rest on my father, and for the first time I noticed that he was the only one not laughing. Seeing the way he kept his eyes fixed on his paper, I felt the heaviness in my stomach begin to push its way up my throat. "Hey, Chelva," Cyril Uncle cried out to my father. "Looks like you have a funny one here." My father pretended he had not heard, and with an inclination of his head, indicated to Amma to get rid of me. She waved her hand in my direction, and I picked up the edges of my veil and fled to the back of the house. That evening, on the way home, both my parents kept their eyes averted from me. Amma glanced at my father occasionally, but he refused to meet her gaze. Sonali, sensing my unease, held my hand tightly in hers. Yet I heard my parents fighting in their room. "How long has this been going on?" my father demanded. "I don't know," Amma cried defensively. "It was as new to me as it was to you." "You should have known. You should have kept an eye on him." "What should I have done? Stood over him while he was playing? If he turns out funny like that Rancourt wearer boy, if he turns out to be the laughing stock of Colombo, it'll be all your fault," my father said in a tone of finality. "You always spoil him and encourage all his nonsense." "What do I encourage?" Amma demanded. "You're the one who allows him to come in here while you're dressing and play with your jewelry." Amma was silent in the face of the truth. Of the three of us, I alone was allowed to enter Amma's bedroom and watch her get dressed for special occasions. It was an experience I considered almost religious, for even though I adored the goddesses of the local cinema, Amma was the final statement in female beauty for me. When I knew Amma was getting dressed for a special occasion, I always positioned myself outside her door. Once she had put on her underskirt and blouse, she would ring for our servant Anula to bring her sari, and then while taking it from her, hold the door open so I could go in as well. Entering that room was for me a greater boon than that granted by any god to a mortal. There were two reasons for this. The first was the jewelry box which lay open on the dressing table. With a joy akin to ecstasy, I would lean over and gaze inside, the faint smell of perfume rising out of the box each time I picked up a piece of jewelry and held it against my nose or ears or throat. The second was the pleasure of watching Amma drape her sari. watching her shake open the yards of material, which like a Chinese banner caught by the wind would linger in the air for a moment before drifting gently to the floor. Watching her pick up one end of it, tuck it into the waistband of her skirt, make the pleats, and then with a flick of her wrist invert the pleats and tuck them into her waistband, and finally watching her drape the palu across her breast and pin it into place with a brooch. When Amma was finished, she would check to make sure that the back of the sari had not risen up with the pinning of the palu, then move back and look at herself in the mirror. Standing next to her or seated on the edge of the bed, I too would look at her reflection in the mirror, and with a contented sigh of an artist who has finally captured the exact effect he wants, I would say, "You should have been a film star, Amma." "A film star?" she would cry and lightly smack the side of my head. "What kind of a low-class type person do you think I am?" One day, about a week after the incident at my grandparents', I positioned myself outside my parents' bedroom door. When Anula arrived with the sari, Amma took it and quickly shut the door. I waited patiently, thinking Amma had not yet put on her blouse and skirt, but the door never opened. Finally, perplexed, Amma had forgotten. I knocked timidly on the door. She did not answer, but I could hear her moving around inside. I knocked a little louder and called out, "Amma," through the keyhole. Still no response, and I was about to call her name again when she replied gruffly, "Go away, can't you see I'm busy?" I stared disbelievingly at the door. Inside I could hear the rustle of the sari as it brushed along the floor. I lifted my hand to knock again when suddenly I remembered the choral I had heard on the night of that last Spender day. My hand fell limply by my side. I crept away quietly to my bedroom, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at my feet for a long time. It was clear to me that I had done something wrong, but what it was I couldn't comprehend. I thought of what my father had said about turning out funny. The word funny, as I understood it, meant either humorous or strange, as in the expression, "that's funny." Neither of these fitted the sense in which my father had used the word, for there had been a hint of disgust in his tone. Later, Amma came out of her room and called Anula to give her instructions for the evening. As I listened to the sound of her voice, I realized that something had changed forever between us. Thank you.